Hello everyone, welcome to my channel DG Learning. I'm Ranjita and I'll welcome you all. First of all, a very thank you to everyone for your love and support. Today we have crossed it's approx 4K सब्सक्राइबर जस्ट होने ही वाला है तो थैंक यू सो मच फॉर योर लव एंड सपोर्ट एंड रियली सॉरी बिकॉज मैंने काफ़ी इंतज़ार करवाया है सेमेस्टर 2 के नोट्स के लिए. मुझे काफ़ी सारे कमेंट्स भी आ रहे थे कि मैम सेमेस्टर 2 के नोट्स प्रोवाइड कीजिए. सो फाइनली सेमेस्टर 2 के नोट्स आज से मैं प्रोवाइड करना स्टार्ट कर रही हूँ. येस, वन मोर थिंग, इसके पहले मैंने सेमेस्टर 1 के जो भी क्वेश्चन पेपर्स है 2020 के वो सारे क्वेश्चन पेपर्स अपलोड कर दिया है. 2020 मीन्स 2022 सेशन वाले लोग जो है उनके जो एग्जाम्स है वो लास्ट मंथ हुए हैं ना. सो दैट पेपर्स आई हैव ऑलरेडी अपलोडेड, वो आप वीडियो पे देख सकते हो. उसके पेपर्स जस्ट मैंने पेपर्स ही अपलोड किया है बिकॉज बहुत ही मुश्किल से मुझे पेपर्स मिले, क्वेश्चन पेपर्स, सो मैंने अपलोड कर दिया. ठीक है. सो फाइनली आज से हम सेमेस्टर 2 स्टार्ट करने वाले हैं. सेमेस्टर 2 का हमारा जो फर्स्ट पेपर है दैट इज पेपर 3, इसका नाम है लर्निंग एंड टीचिंग. सो लर्निंग एंड टीचिंग का आज हम यूनिट 1 करने वाले हैं दैट इज अंडरस्टैंडिंग लर्निंग प्रोसेस. और अब आपको ज़्यादा वेट करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. यस, वन मोर थिंग, वैसे मुझे सुनने में आ रहा है कि जो 20 to 22 सेशन वाले जो लोग हैं उनके सेकेंड सेमेस्टर और थर्ड सेमेस्टर शायद ही ना हो, डायरेक्टली फर्स्ट के बाद डायरेक्टली फोर्थ सेमेस्टर हो शायद. नॉट एग्जैक्टली मीन्स वैसा कंफर्म नहीं है बट ऐसा सुनने में आ रहा है. जो कॉलेजेस में होंगे उन्हें ये ज़्यादा अच्छे से पता होगा, तो आप लोग एक बार ये चीज़ देख लीजिएगा. ठीक है. वैसे हम तो सेमेस्टर 2 के नोट्स ऑलरेडी अपलोड करेंगे ही, तो आप नोट्स आपको यहाँ से मिल ही जाएगा, उसके लिए नो नीड टू वरी. सो लेट अस स्टार्ट विदाउट वेस्टिंग एनी टाइम. पेपर 3 दैट इज लर्निंग एंड टीचिंग, इसके यूनिट 1 दैट इज अंडरस्टैंडिंग लर्निंग प्रोसेस. ओके, आई एम रीडिंग इट फॉर यू, सो यू कैन राइट इट डाउन और आप नोट्स बना सकते हो खुद से. ज़्यादा बेटर से आप यहाँ से नोट्स लेकर के यहाँ से आप आराम से बना सकते हो, कोई इश्यूज़ नहीं है. एंड आई होप कि फर्स्ट सेमेस्टर में आपको मेरे नोट्स ने काफ़ी हेल्प किया हो और इसी तरह से आप अपना लव और सपोर्ट मुझे देते रहिए. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर दैट. लेट अस स्टार्ट. Concept of learning. Concept of learning is of huge importance in human behavior. Human being goes on learning from birth till death. Albert Einstein is one of his quotes said that once you stop learning, you start dying. So learning is a natural phenomenon which is natural to all organisms including both humans and animals. Learning affects a child's development. A child learns new habits only through the process of learning and through imitated traditions and customs. Intellectual skills are also developed through learning. The decision of right and wrong, the concept of justice and aesthetic sense, etc., developed through learning. This process of learning continues throughout life. Learning is the basis of maturation. Learning affects our language, customs and traditions, attitudes and beliefs, personalities, and goals. Okay. In fact, it would not be wrong to say that learning affects all aspects of our life. Learning is a key concept of psychology. Learning phenomena is very important for the development of human being. Various psychologists have explained learning from different points of view. According to behaviorists, learning is the modification of behavior as a result of experience. The child brings changes in his behavior again after gaining experiences from the environment. Everything a learner does or thinks is learning. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior of the learner. It even brings changes in the personality traits of the learner. Now comes to the definition and meaning of learner. ये अभी जो था concept of learning, that was the introduction. Okay, so definitions and meaning of learner. First comes to Crow and Crow. Crow and Crow states that learning is acquisition of knowledge, habits, and attitude. It involves new ways of doing things in order to overcome obstacles or to adjust to new situations. It enables a person to satisfy interest to attain goals. Henry Smith. Henry Smith states that learning is the acquisition of new behavior or the strengthening or weakening of the old behavior as a result of experience. Woodward defines learning as any activity can be called learning as far as it develops the individual in any aspect, good or bad, and makes his behavior and experiences different from what otherwise have been. Thus, learning may be defined as any relatively permanent change in behavior. Learning may be defined as the acquisition of knowledge, attitudes, skills, and ways of thinking. Learning is a permanent change in behavior for better or worse, which results occurs as a result of practice and experience. Above definitions have three important elements. First is the learning is a change in behavior of better or worse. It is a change that takes place through practice and experience. And before it can be called learning, the change must be relatively permanent, that is, it must last for a long time. Exactly how long cannot be specified, but we usually think of learning lasting for days, months, years, in contrast to temporary behavioral effects. Thus, learning is a complex process. It is a process by which all organisms, as a result of its interaction in a situation, acquires a new mode of behavior which tends to persist and affects its behavior in the future. Thus, learning takes place when an organism reacts to a situation. It consists of certain changes in behavior or adjustments, and this type of behavior is utilized to some degree in other situations. Okay, now comes to the nature and dimension of learning. Nature and dimensions of learning. Learning occupies a very important place in our life. It provides a key to the structure of our personality and behavior. Experience, direct or indirect, plays a very important and dominating role in molding and shaping the behavior of the individual from the very beginning. When a child touches a hot pan and gets burned, she immediately withdraws his or her hand and learns to touch such vessels carefully. He or she concludes that if one touches a hot vessel, one gets burned. In the same way, from other experiences in his or her day to day life, he or she derives different conclusions and modifies his or her behavior. These changes in behavior brought about by experience are commonly known as learning, and this process of gaining experiences, drawing conclusions, and changing behavior goes on from womb to tomb. Okay, now comes to the nature of learning as follows. First is a learning is a process and not a product. Learning is a fundamental and lifelong process. Attitudes, fears, gestures, motor skills, language skills, etc. are the products of learning. They are not learning themselves. In a classroom, when learning is viewed as a product, then it is viewed as something external, something like shopping. People go out and buy knowledge, and then it becomes their possession. Paulo Freire, in his book Pedagogy and the Oppressed, criticizes this and says that education thus becomes an act of depositing in which the students are the depositors and the teachers is the depositor. The students are the depositories and the teacher is the depositor. In this banking concept of education, the teacher is the subject of the learning process while the pupils are mere objects. Whereas, when learning is viewed as a process, it is viewed as something internal or personal. It is something that a child does in order to understand the real world and uses it as a tool for survival. Learning is a purposive or goal directed. Learning is not an aimless activity. All true learning is based on purpose. We do not learn anything and everything that comes in our way in a haphazard manner. However, some experts argue that sometimes learning is unintended. Next point, learning generally involves some degree of permanence. Activities bringing temporary change in behavior and not lasting do not come under learning. For example, cramming the content matter by a learner for examination and forgetting it after some time does not bring any change to some extent of permanence in the total behavior pattern of the learner, and thus this type of learning cannot be said as true learning. Learning is universal and continuous. Every creature till it lives learns. In human beings, it is not restricted to any particular age, sex, race, or culture. It is a continuous, never ending process which starts from birth and continues till death. Learning prepares for adjustment. Learning helps the individual to adjust herself or himself adequately and adapt to the changes that may be necessary to the new situations. We meet with new situations which demands solutions. Repeated efforts are required to react to them effectively These experiences leave behind some effects in the mental structure and modify our behavior. Learning is comprehensive. The scope of learning is spread over each and every dimension of life. It is a comprehensive process which covers all domains cognitive, affective, and psychomotor, that is, of human behavior. Learning is a change in response or behavior, may be favorable or unfavorable. Learning leads to changes in behavior, but this did not necessarily mean that these changes always bring about improvement or positive development. These are chances to drift to the negative side too. Learning is organizing experience. Learning involves all those experience and training of an individual that is right from the birth which help him or her to produce changes in behavior. It is not mere addition to knowledge or mere acquisition of facts. It is a reorganization of the experience which may also include unlearning. Instincts and reflexes are not learning. Changes in behavior on the basis of native response tendencies like instincts and reflexes, that is, infant sucking behavior, blinking at the bright lights, cannot be attributed to learning. बिकॉज ये तो हमारा कॉमन ही बिहेवियर ही होता है ना, लाइट लग रहा है आंख में तो हम ब्लिंक कर रहे हैं. इट्स नॉट लर्निंग, हमने सीखा नहीं है. ओके. Learning does not include changes in behavior on account of maturation, fatigue, illness, or drug, etc. Okay. Now comes to the dimensions of learning. According to Mazunat 2006, Dimensions of Learning is a comprehensive model that uses what researchers and theorists know about learning to define the learning process. Their premises is that 5 types of thinking, that is, 5 dimensions of learning, are essential to successful learning. These 5 dimensions of learning are attitudes and perception, acquire and integrate knowledge, extend and refine knowledge, use knowledge meaningfully, and habits of mind. Okay, now let us see all these points in detail. Attitudes and perception. A key element of effective teaching is helping learners to establish positive attitudes and perception about the classroom and about learning because these affects learners' abilities to learn. If learners find the classroom as an unsafe and disorderly place, their understanding learning will be negatively affected. Also, learners' positive attitude about the classroom task helps in learning. Second point is acquire and integrate knowledge. Providing new knowledge by integrating and previous knowledge helps in learning. When learners are learning new information, they must be guided in relating to the new knowledge to what they already know, organizing that information and then making it a part of their long-term memory. Third is the extent and refine knowledge. Learning does not stop with acquiring and integrating knowledge. Learners develop an in-depth understanding through the process of extending and refining their knowledge. Example, by making their new distinctions, clearing up misconceptions, and reaching conclusions. Various reasoning processes like comparing, classifying, abstracting, inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, constructing support, analyzing errors, analyzing perspectives, etc. are used by the learners to analyze for extending and refining their knowledge. Use knowledge meaningfully. The most effective learning occurs when we use knowledge to perform meaningful tasks. So, making sure that learners have the opportunity to use knowledge meaningfully is one of the most important parts of planning a teaching activity. For this, reasoning processes like decision making, problem solving, invention, experimental inquiry, investigation, system analysis, etc. may be used. The last point is the habits of mind. Habits of mind. A learner becomes an effective learner by developing powerful habits of mind that enable him or her to think critically, do things creatively, and regulate his or her behavior. The mental habits for critical thinking are being accurate and seeking accuracy, being clear and seeking clarity, maintaining an open mind, restraining impulsivity, taking a position when the situation warrants it, and responding appropriately to other feeling and level of knowledge. Habit of pushing the limits of own knowledge and abilities, generating, trusting, and maintaining own standards of evolution enable in thinking creatively. Self regulated thinking is enabled by the habits of monitoring own thinking, planning appropriately, identifying and using necessary resources, responding appropriately to feedback, and evaluating the effectiveness of own action. These five dimensions of learning do not operate in isolation but work together. All learning takes place against the backdrop of learners, attitudes, and perceptions, and the use of productive habits of mind. Having positive attitudes and perception and using productive habits of mind makes learning easier and helps in learning more. When positive attitudes and perceptions are in place and productive habits of mind are being used, learners can more effectively do the thinking required in the other three dimensions, that is, acquiring and integrating knowledge, extending and refining knowledge, and using knowledge meaningfully. Thus, the dimensions of learning help a teacher achieve a major goal of education, that is, to enhance learning. Okay? Our next point is the process of learning. Learning is a process and not a product. This process has continuity and is carried out in various steps. While summing up these steps, Smith gives the following definition. In short, the learning process involves a motive or drive, an attractive goal, and a block to the attainment of the goal. All these are essential. Let us try to examine Smith's statement. The first step in the process of learning is motive or drive. Motive is the dynamic process that energizes behavior and compels a child to act. Every individual has to take care of the satisfaction of these basic motives and needs. As long as our present behavior, knowledge, skill, and performance are adequate to satisfy all our needs, we do not feel any need to change our behavior or acquire new knowledge and skills. It is the requirement that initiates a learner to learn something. Motives and needs of the learner demand their satisfaction. When the need of a learner is strong enough, he is compelled to strive for the satisfaction. For this purpose, he has to set definite goals and aims for achievement. Definiteness of the aim and setting of the goal helps in making the learning purpose and interesting. The goal attracts us to learn, then comes to the third step in the process of learning, which is equally essential as the previous ones. It is the term of some obstacle or block or barrier that keeps us from attaining that goal. If we face no difficulty in attaining our goal, we need not bring any change in our present behavior, stock of knowledge and skills. This means that we do not need to learn. Hence, the block or problem is an essential step in the learning process. We try to change or modify our behavior only when there is a need to do so to reach the goal that our unsatisfied motives create. See this diagram. जब तक बैरियर्स नहीं आएंगे तब तक हम कुछ नहीं सीखते हैं. जब तक हम अपने कंफर्ट जोन में रहेंगे, हाँ ठीक है ना, ओके वी विल अचीव आवर गोल, ठीक है मेहनत करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, अब आप उतना करना ही नहीं चाहोगे. जब तक बैरियर्स, जब तक आपके सामने कोई प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट नहीं होगा, आप उसका सल्यूशन नहीं ढूंढ सकते हो. आपको पता ही नहीं रहेगा कि उसे टैकल कैसे करना है ना. सेम थिंग विद द लर्निंग ऑल्सो. जब तक कोई बैरियर्स नहीं आएगा सामने, आप नहीं सीखोगे कि उससे हम सक्सेसफुल कैसे हो, हम अपना गोल को कैसे अचीव कर सके. ठीक है. सो दिस इज द डायग्राम फॉर दैट. Let us clear the overviews by taking an example. Suppose you wish to be included in your college hockey team and that appeal to many of your psychological needs. You want to esteem of your colleagues and by your teacher. You are also motivated by the interesting experiences that you may enjoy, but you are blocked by your lack of skill in dodging, tackling, and handling the ball. These obstacles and blocks in the path of a goal achievement will set you work on your deficiency and acquire essential skills through the sufficient practice and coaching. ये ब्लॉक्स आएंगे तभी तो आप कोशिश करोगे ना कि उसे टैकल कैसे करना है, उस ऑब्स्टिकल को पार करके हम कैसे अपने गोल को अचीव कर सकें. ठीक है. By these steps, Smith has tried to consider the problem as to why we learn and has emphasized the role of motivation, needs, and goal in the process of learning. But the process of learning remains incomplete with just these three elements: motives, goals, and blocks, which Smith has suggested. It is rather a preparatory stage for learning than being the stage for actual learning. With these three steps, strong desire and essential readiness is produced in the child for learning something. It is very essential for any scheme of learning. The child's readiness and his positive attitude towards learning is to be ascertained before beginning the learning programs. There are many factors that contribute towards the learning readiness. Those worth mentioning are his physical and mental maturity, previously acquired knowledge and skills, and his ability in goal setting. With the help of all these factors, teachers or parents should try to fix an appropriate level of aspiration for the child so that he may proceed properly on the path of the learning. The next step in the process of learning after the preparatory stage are the concerned with the task of actual learning by the learner. One of such important steps in the learning situations. The learning situation provides opportunity for learning. The quality, speed, and effectiveness of learning depends much upon the kind of learning situation and environment available to the learner. Healthy and favorable learning environment brings satisfactory results in learning, while poor and unfavorable learning environment proves an obstacle in the path of learning. In a particular learning environment, when the learner strives to learn something, the process of learning involves constant interaction. According to Dai Parekh, interaction is the process of responding to a situation and getting feedback from it, satisfaction and thwarting of the needs. Learning results from such interactions. In fact, when a child strives to learn something in order to achieve his desired goal, he is very curious to know the result of his striving. On this path, when he acquires some new knowledge and skills or brings changes in his behavior, he is desirous to know whether or not with these changes he will be able to cherish the desired end. If he finds that all that has been learned so far is useful and feels satisfied with his progress, he is sure to gain speed in the path of his learning. Moreover, the learning process has continuity in its flow. What has been learned so far on its path of learning works as a running capital and base for further learning. Learning at a particular moment in a learning environment brings essential changes in the behavior of an individual. These changes later on become part and partial of the learning behavior. These learned acts as are retained for a longer time depending upon the nature of the learner and effectiveness of the learning process and used in the similar situation when the need and opportunity arise. Therefore, the process of learning does not end with the acquisition of certain knowledge, skills, and changes in behavior in one particular situation. It is a never ending process. The change once required or the learning once accomplished gets its fixation in other likewise situation. It stands for its modification and thus always seems in a process of continuous change and development. Gagners' theory of learning. Robert Gagner, the famous American psychologist, put forward a theory of learning and instruction incorporating a behavioristic eclectic approach to the psychology of learning and teaching. He is especially known for his famous writing, The Conditions of Learning and Instructional Technology Foundations. The major theoretical notions and ideas propagated by him through his learning theory may be summarized now. The meaning and concept of learning. Learning, according to Gagner, may be considered a change in human disposition of or capability which can be retained and which is not simply ascribable to the process of growth. The major task or objective of one's learning is to bring the required changes in his way of disposition, that is, tendency to behave in certain ways in given situation, or the capability of performing one's task or the other. The result or impact of learning thus may be subjected to proper measurement, since these can be properly observed and inferred by observing the difference in performance. In the performance of the learner before and after learning. These changes in behavioral ability and potential of the learner are somewhat enduring as the learner is capable of utilizing and benefiting through the outcomes of such learning. In any case, this is an acquired tendency which cannot be simply associated with the process of natural growth, that is, maturation, etc. Types of learning. Gagner hierarchical structure of learning. Gagner maintained that all learnings are not alike, and consequently, he divided human learning into 8 types or categories arranged in hierarchy. He gave them a hierarchical order based on their internal connections, since one type of learning provides a prerequisite for their next higher order learning. These 8 types of learning in their hierarchical order can be presented in the form of table as follows. I'll show you the table. While presenting such a hierarchical order, Gagner tried to guide the process of learning and instructional organization by emphasizing that in learning, the lower steps of hierarchy must be mastered before the higher steps can be learned. Gagner's theory of learning provides a genuine basis for the proper organization and sequencing of instructions. See, this is the table. Gagner's system of learning. हायरार्कियल ऑर्डर क्या है, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 लाइन से दिया गया है. टाइप क्या है और उसके ब्रीफ डिस्क्रिप्शन से उसके नेचर के. ठीक है. तो फर्स्ट इज द सिग्नल लर्निंग, अ लर्निंग ऑफ द नेचर दैट वी आर स्टॉप्ड एट द रेड लाइट एंड स्टार्ट ड्राइविंग आवर व्हीकल एट द ग्रीन. Here we learn to make a generalized response to a signal or stimulus, as happens with the classical conditioning of Pavlov and Watson. Second is the stimulus response, that is SR learning. SR को ही stimulus response learning भी बोलते हैं. Learning based on SR type instrumental conditioning emphasized by Thorndike. Here a stimulus is properly emphasized by Here, a stimulus is properly discriminated for a mechanical alike response. Third is the chaining. In this type of learning, 2 or more SR connections are joined together. Here, SR means stimulus response. Okay. Fourth one is the verbal association. In this type of learning, the learner is made to emit chained responses of SR type of by making verbal associations. Fifth is the multiple discrimination. This is a stage of good discrimination, that is to learn making different responses to different, even having too much resemblance stimuli. Sixth point is the concept learning. In this type of learning, one learns to provide a common response to a class of stimuli. Seventh, rule learning, also known as learning of principle. Principles are generated through the chaining of 2 or more concepts. Example, if one is thirsty, one needs water to drink. Next, last point is the problem solving. In this type of learning, higher mental or cognitive abilities are involved for making use of the concept and rules for solving one or the other problem. Okay. So this was the table, that is the Gagner system of learning and its description of nature. It's already in the hierarchical order. Okay. Gagner's conditions of learning. According to Gagner's, learning must be made as easy as possible by supporting the internal process through the proper planning of educational activities. To make learning easier, Robert Gagners lists a series of 9 instructions that support the learning process. He noted that these 9 instructions should be used in every lesson. First is the gain attention. The first of the instruction from the Gagner's condition of the learning is gaining attention. The principle of each learning process is that the student is motivated and is open to receiving new information. This can be achieved by mentioning the students by name, involving them in the problem, or calling them to order so their full attention is directed at the provider of the information. ठीक है. Second is the identify objective. Students can more easily be involved in the process when they become aware of the learning objectives and of the skills they have gained at the end of the session. By sharing objectives with the students, they can develop their own expectations about what expected of them during the lessons. Third is the recall prior learning, a concept that often recurs in Gagners conditions of learning is recalling previously learned knowledge. That's important to clarify the context. Recalling prior knowledge can be facilitated in various ways, such as through a question answers prior to the lesson and online quizzes taken in the classroom, increasingly often where the students take a test on what they have previously learned. Fourth point is the present stimulus. These instructions depend on the skill to be learned. It's important that the stimulus is aimed at characteristics of the desired outcomes so students can understand the nature and reason of the learning experience. Fifth point is the maturation. Maturation and learning are actually interrelated activities. However, they are not the same. Learning is the gathering of knowledge and skill with the help of study. This is with respect to formal learning. Informal learning begins from birth, the learning that comes from observations and experiences. Maturation, on the other hand, is an act of maturity. It refers to the physical and mental development, so the ability to act, react, and behave responsibly comes from the maturity. Okay, sixth point is the elicit performance. The first five instructions attempt to ensure the learning process is effective. These instructions, however, allow the students to demonstrate what they have learned to the people around them and to themselves. It is concerns carrying out a learned skills as indication that the learning process has been successful. Next, the seventh point is the provide feedback. Provide feedback. It's crucial that the feedback students receive isn't just based on whether or not the work is correct. It must also be discussed how well they have done, the areas that could be with improvement, and how their general performance can be improved. Next point is the access performance. These instructions or the phase of the process can only take place when the students have had sufficient opportunity to practice so a skill is fine tuned. Most theories on learning agree that demonstrations of actions must be repeated through time to prove that the knowledge has actually been gained. It requires both a formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment is the continuous process of evaluation, and summative assessment takes place at the end of a process to demonstrate that a skills or learning aspects that has been mastered. FA और SA जिसे हम लोग बोलते हैं, FA जो होता है वो जैसे हम लोग यूनिट टेस्ट बोलते हैं वो हमारा फॉर्मेटिव असेसमेंट है, और जो हमारे फाइनल्स होते हैं ना 80 मार्क्स वाले जो एग्जाम उससे हम लोग समेटिव असेसमेंट बोलते हैं. Next is the enhancement retention or transfer. Enhanced retention or transfer, sorry. Enhance retention transfer. Enhancing the retention of knowledge and the transfer of knowledge is the last instruction of Gagners condition of learning. It's important to recognize the value of the use of different activities to optimize the retention and transfer of skills. There are various tools available for memory training, but in most cases, the best results are achieved through repetition. Now comes to the different learning styles. Meaning of learning style. Meaning of learning style. Point 5 is first point. Learning styles are unique ways in which individuals process information. They do so in the course of learning new concepts and principles. All people can be classified according to their style of learning. We can describe learning styles as a set of factors, behaviors, and attitudes that helps to learn for an individual in a given situation. They also influence how students learn, how the teacher teaches, and how both of them interact. Each person is born with certain tendencies towards particular style. These tendencies are also influenced by culture, personal experience, maturity level, and development. So, learning styles are different approaches or ways of learning. Components of learning styles are cognitive element, affective element, and psychological elements. These elements may be strongly influenced by a person's cultural background. Okay, now comes to the definitions of learning style. A learning style is nothing but a preferential mode through which a person likes a master learning, solve problems, think, or react in a pedagogical situation. Four learning styles types. Different people learn differently. Psychologists try to spell out the traits of different types of learners. They try to categorize them into different learning styles. VARK, that is VARK, is the most used learning styles model developed in 1987 by Neil Flemings from New Zealand. Its letters stand for four learning style: visual, auditory, read write, kinesthetic. A teacher's best opinion is to use variety of teaching techniques to give all students the best chance to learn. Next is the visual learning style. People with visual learning style absorb information by seeing it in front of them and storing the images in their brain. They tend to struggle with verbal directions and are easily distracted by noise. They have good handwriting, are very detail oriented, organized. They have awareness of colors and shapes. Next is the auditory learning style. Verbal language is the primary mode for exchanging information for those with the auditory learning style. They learn best by hearing and speaking. They often talk more than the average person. They are social and understand concepts by talking about them. Some auditory learners read slowly. They have trouble writing and have tough time staying quiet for long stretches of time. Next is the read or write learning style. Read or write learning styles. Read write learners specifically learn best through the written word. They absorb information by reading books and handouts, taking lot of notes and making lists. They prefer lectures, diagrams and scientific concepts to be explained through written language. They are often fast readers and skillful writers. Such learners may struggle with verbal directions and are easily distracted by noise. Okay. Next is the kinesthetic learning style. People with kinesthetic learning style learn best by doing, moving around, and handling physical objects. They like to explore outdoors and prefer trying new skills for themselves and are often coordinated and may excel in athletics. They may find hard to sit still for long periods of time and may struggle with reading and spelling. They learn differently. So, आप किस तरह का style follow करते हो? Finally came to the last topic of this unit, that is the outcomes of learning. This is the last point. चलिए करते हैं. The outcomes of learning. Learning, according to the Gagners, is supposed to result in the enhancement of a person's performance and capability by acquiring new ways of behaving, that is, gaining in terms of knowledge, understanding skills, and change of attitudes, etc. He declared that all types of human learning may result in the development of human capabilities in terms of the following components: verbal information, intellectual skills, cognitive strategies, motor skills, and attitude. Let us know in detail about these outcomes of learning. First is the verbal information. Through one's learning, one may acquire different types of information in a verbal form, that is, listening, viewing, and reading. One may then make use of this information for one's own purposes or transmit it to others through verbal means. Verbal communication of the acquired information, they may prove helpful in many ways to the learner. Second is the intellectual skills. Another outcome of learning is that it helps the learner acquire necessary intellectual skills. That is, Gagners 1970 has further classified these intellectual skills into level or types. Example: discrimination, concept formation, and rule learning. According to him, these skills assist the learner in knowing how, in comparison to knowing that of verbal information, that is, how to convert decimal into fraction, how to interpret various symbols on a page into recognized words, and so on. Third is the cognitive strategies. These refer to the internally organized capabilities of a learner which he requires through the process of learning. These strategies help him in the task related to attending, learning, remembering, thinking, and problem solving, leading him to attain his individual and social goals. Next is the motor skills. Learning affects the cognitive domain of a person's behavior by bringing the required changes in the way he does things through motor activities. His learning to drive a car, swimming, playing a musical instrument, or playing a game are all the outcomes of acquisition and development of his motor skills. ठीक है? Next is the attitude. Learning helps the learner to bring significant changes in the affective domain of his behavior, particularly in terms of the change in his disposition or attitude, that is, his attitude towards things, persons, or events. These outcomes can be illustrated in this form. This is a table illustrating Gagners outcomes of learning, learning outcomes, and examples of human performance made possible by the related learning outcome. First is the verbal information stating Newton's law of motion. Second is the intellectual skills exhibited in the following manner. First is the description, distinguishing printed letter D from B. Concept formation, naming apple as fruit and distinguishing it from other fruits. Generalization of rule or principle, demonstrating and concluding that matter expands after heating. Third is the cognitive strategy, thinking and discovering a novel strategy for the purification of water. Motor skills, learning to play harmonium. Attitude, choosing teaching as a noble profession. ठीक है. सो दीज आर द एग्जाम्पल्स जो भी अभी हम लोग पढ़े हैं लर्निंग आउटकम्स उसके एग्जाम्पल्स है ये. आप ये कर सकते हो आराम से. यू कैन मेक द नोट्स. एंड ये हमारा यहाँ पे सेकेंड सेमेस्टर की जो पेपर 3 है उसका जो फर्स्ट यूनिट है यहाँ पे ये ख़त्म होता है. नेक्स्ट वीडियो में मैं फिर आपके लिए लेके आऊँगी यूनिट 2 के नोट्स लेकर के आऊँगी. ठीक है, पेपर 3 के यूनिट 2 के नोट्स लेकर के आऊँगी. And yes, if this video is helpful for you, अगर ये notes आपके लिए ज़रा भी helpful है, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Okay? Thank you for watching.